and welcome to Conversations with Lothrop. This is Dick Lothrop, and I'll be your host for the next 30 to 40 minutes while we interview another interesting guest. Our guest this evening is Pastor Robert Schreiner, pastor of Grace Lutheran Church here in Oberlin. And we are delighted, sir, to have you here.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
You certainly have an interesting background. Let me go through just a few things quickly. You were born in Fort Wayne.
That's right.
And got a Bachelor of Science from Indiana University. Mm-hmm. So you're a true Hoosier.
That's right.
That's correct.
That's right.
All right. Now, this is what interests me. You got commissioned in the Marine Corps and were in there 7 years. Is
right.
this right?
Mm-hmm.
And you did flying.
Yes, I did.
Tactical aircraft.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, how did you get into that? Tell us about that.
Well, the aviation was a dream of mine that dates back to, my grade school days. I had always been interested in particularly military aviation, and I think that was probably because that was one of my dad's interests that he shared with me. And I was just very focused on that, and that was a dream that I was able to live out.
That's fascinating, wonderful. Did you do it through an ROTC program initially? Or
well,
not?
it was a program similar to ROTC that the Marine Corps sponsored. It was called the Platoon Leaders Class. My particular brand of that was the aviation end of that program. And I did take flying lessons while I was in college, and got involved in some military activities then. So it's similar to ROTC. I think that program is still going in the Marine Corps too. Yeah.
Let's see, then you went on to Concordia Theological Seminary.
After my military experience, yeah.
You can answer a question. There seem to be a lot of Concordia seminaries in different places.
Yeah. All of the, at least in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, all of the seminaries and many of the colleges too. There's a kind of a chain of colleges, synodical colleges across the country, and Concordia is the common name. Yeah.
I used to work in Illinois, central Illinois, and I had to travel a lot, and I used to get a marvelous radio station that had classical music on it that I loved.
Okay.
From Concordia Seminary in Webster Groves, I think maybe, or St. Louis, or right in that area, someplace.
Yeah.
So my first.
And Concordia means harmony, so we try very hard to live up to that.
I was going to ask you what that meant. Yes. And that's always a challenge, particularly in Oberlin, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then you got a Doctor of Ministry degree from Christian International School of Theology.
While I was pastoring in Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you came to Grace Lutheran Church in 1994 from Snyder, Nebraska. Is
That's
that
right.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Where's
right.
Snyder?
Oh, it's very small. It's about an hour north of Omaha.
Mm-hmm.
And Snyder's claim to fame, at least among Lutherans, is that was the hometown of Oswald Hoffman, who was the Lutheran Hour speaker before the present one. And Ozzy Hoffman is still very active and traveling all around the world. Yeah, that was his hometown. So my parsonage was the home that he was raised in.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you would like to tell us about your pre-college years?
Well, actually, that could probably be summed up just by saying just about everything I did was focused on getting me eventually to military aviation.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of focused on science and math classes and things like that. I took education as a major subject at Indiana University on my dad's advice because he said that it would be a good idea for me to have a broad general education, and my dad was an educator, and he thought that education had served him very well. So I kind of followed in my dad's footsteps along those lines, and it has. It's served me very well through the years. Yeah.
Well, in a way, ministers are educating, aren't they?
Oh, sure.
So there you are.
Yeah.
Yes. I'd like to go back to this Marine thing just a moment to ask you if you still do any flying. Do you still?
I haven't flown for years. The excuse I always give is that I can't afford to fly anymore. It's an expensive hobby. But honestly, after flying tactical jets, going out to the local airport and flying a little puddle jumper isn't all that attractive to me anymore.
Are you in the reserves?
No, I'm not.
So
no, I fulfilled my reserve obligation on active duty.
I see. So this is probably an interesting thing you're going to look back on rather than forward to.
Oh, yeah,
Having some
exactly.
total national
Exactly.
order, yes,
Yeah, I wouldn't
disaster.
trade that experience for anything. It was just, it was exciting. It was wonderful. A real growing and learning experience for me, and really just loads of fun.
What drew you to the Christian ministry? See, this is a fascinating switch from marine aviation.
It
to
is quite a
Christian
turnaround,
ministry.
isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah, it's a little bit
fascinating.
unusual. I'd have to say the first thing that drew me in that direction was coming to the Christian faith at all. I had pretty much left the church around junior high age basically through unbelief. I just did not believe the things that were being taught at church. And in fact, I had a series of pastors that came along when I was young that suggested that most of the things that are written in the Bible can't be believed anyway. And so I kind of figured, well, what's the use? And pretty much left the church and went on in a very circuitous, roundabout way of coming back to the church. And I largely credit my coming back to the church to my wife, who's a lifelong Lutheran Christian. And I remember when we got married, I bought her a Bible as a wedding present because I knew how important her religion was to her. And after we'd been married for a short time, I began to realize that since this religion was so important to her, it's something I ought to look into a little bit. And I started reading that Bible that I had given her as a wedding present, and all of a sudden it was like a light bulb came on over my head, and I found that I was believing these things that I'd never believed before.
Sort of a road to Damascus type thing.
You know, very much so.
Bit.
Very much so. And revolutionary for me. Just turned my life upside down. And I still haven't completely adjusted to the changes that have taken place. All very good, very positive, though. And I guess to answer your question, it seems like anything I've ever done, I've done to excess and with a very concentrated focus. Everything in my life prior to that was focused on military aviation, and after that kind of Damascus Road experience, everything was focused on Christianity.
Did you find a psychological wrench between military and ministry?
You know, it's interesting. Actually, I feel like I was much more successful as a Christian minister in the time that I had left in the service before I got out and went to seminary. People were interested in hearing my story and hearing what I had to say about this faith that had come to me. And I assumed that since people around me in the Marines were so interested in hearing about my faith, that I thought, well, you know, when I get into full-time ministry, it's going to be people will be all that much more interested in hearing about what I believe. And I found it isn't that way at all. People just expect pastors to say those things. And so, you know, actually, that's kind of a sad thing for me, because I feel like I was much more effective, much more successful when I was a lay person witnessing to my personal faith and the change that had taken place in me, rather than doing this as a profession or as an occupation. It's not surprising to hear pastors say the things that I say, but it is surprising to hear Marine fighter pilots say that.
When I was looking at this, preparing for this interview, my mind was drawn back to naval and Army chaplains that I know who, in World War II particularly, had to try to come to grips with actually serving in the armed forces, and which was anathema to everything they believed, and still being ministers of the gospel. And I think what you just said ties in, that they found there was such a need for this ministry that it overcame that difficulty. There's a parallel there. Maybe
I guess my personal experience wasn't so much of a deep philosophical challenge or struggle, but it was more of a personal thing. I guess when I came to faith in Christ and realized that faith was going to have some impact on the way I lived my life and the thoughts that I thought and the way I behaved and the way I spoke, I think the real challenge, the real struggle for me was, how much is this faith going to affect me? How much am I going to have to give up, and how much am I going to have to change? And I found through the years that it touches every aspect of your life. So that's really the personal struggle that I've had. And I guess by the time I got to the point where I could work more with a kind of a deep philosophical or theological question, I was out of the Marines and into the life of the church. So I haven't really struggled with that.
Well, let's look at Oberlin. What attracted you to Oberlin?
My answer is going to be nothing, but the reason for that is because in our church, in our system, the way it works is congregations will extend an invitation to a pastor to come and be the pastor. Honestly, I had only heard little bits about Oberlin and Oberlin College before I came here, but I was invited to come here, and I was attracted to a college town. I was attracted to a town that was a little bit closer to my home in Fort Wayne than our home in Nebraska had been, and it was just time for a change. I felt like the Lord was leading me in this direction. Didn't really struggle too much with the decision of whether to accept the call, and so we came here because we were called. We were invited to come here.
You still have family in Fort Wayne?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. My wife and I both do.
Good. I guess the next question is sort of a double question. What are your impressions of Oberlin so far, and is it what you thought or hoped it would be?
I guess after I accepted the call, friends and relatives who knew a little bit more about the Oberlin area community, the personality of the community, gave us little bits and pieces. I think the thing that made the biggest impression on me was I heard somewhere or read somewhere that more students from Oberlin College go on to get graduate degrees and doctoral level degrees than I think any other college in the country. And I was pretty impressed by that, and that kind of stuck with me. But I think, I guess we had enough people kind of describe the community to us that we kind of knew what to expect when we got here, and it was pretty much what we did expect. No real disappointments or surprises or anything like that. I do remember that when I received the call, I talked to my district president on the telephone, or actually the district president of this congregation, who I had known earlier. I had vicared for this man back in Chicago, and he said there aren't many opportunities like this Oberlin congregation that are going to come along. He says this is one you want to think about very carefully, because he said this is a good call. It's a nice community. The church, the congregation is a very good congregation. So he gave me good advice, and I trusted him completely, and he was right.
That's quite a tribute, too, to the congregation, isn't it?
It really is. And of course, that's somebody who had come in from the outside and visited in Oberlin on a number of occasions, and was really impressed by what he saw, and I was too, and continue to be.
Good.
I do think there's a great need for Christian ministry here. Of course, there's a variety of Christian ministry offered. I think we have maybe something a little unique at Grace Lutheran Church, but very much needed here in this community. So,
I want to get back to that general topic in a minute.
Yeah.
Let me first ask you, you had, 10 years in the ministry now, just about?
Right.
And is it what you hoped it would be?
I would have to say it's different from what I expected. But not growing up in the church, not even being a Christian all of my life, like so many pastors are, I really didn't know what to expect, and I think I had kind of created an idealized church, and it didn't turn out to be that. But that was unrealistic. So I think I've grown up a little bit in those 10 years, and
so the pluses greatly outweigh the minuses.
Oh, yes.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, as much as I enjoyed my military experience, I'm much more content in this work.
And well, let's take a break. We can take a break here.
Fine.
And then we'll get into challenges ministers face in '97.
Good.
Then we can focus it down to Oberlin.
Good.
How we do it. How's that?
Good.
So
That sounds great.
we will be back in just a few minutes, in a minute or two, with the second half of this program.
When Norm Abram heard he was coming to HGTV, he grabbed his favorite shirt and headed to the new Yankee workshop to build something special. We proudly welcome Master Carpenter Norm Abram and the new Yankee Workshop, the country's longest running and most respected woodworking program, to home and garden television.
On Saturday, May 17th for Lorain County Pride Day. Clean up, fix up, pick up your yard, neighborhood, place of business, public areas, or anything that needs improvement. Let's work together to make Lorain County all that it can and should be. Take Pride Countywide on Saturday, May 17th. It's Lorain County Pride Day. We can make it something to see. Lorain County Pride Day. Our lovely county just makes us love and more.
Welcome back to the second half of this program with Pastor Schreiner of the Grace Lutheran Church. The phone number is 775-1635 if you would like to call and have any comments or questions you'd like to ask our guest. In the meantime, we're going to go on and talk about the ministry first in general. And I'd like to know what special challenges do you think all ministers face in 1997? Is there or are there common themes or challenges?
Not having been involved in all ministries, I'm not sure what every pastor faces, but the ones that I've become acquainted with, and I'd categorize us, I guess, as mainline denominational church pastors. I think we are in parishes where many of the members, the most faithful members, have been around for a long time, and they have seen changes take place, I think mainly in society over the last 50 years. People's priorities are different, and I think these folks, the older folks particularly, really agonize over the fact that they remember the glory days of the church when all the pews were filled and everybody's kids used to come to Sunday school, and now they see smaller crowds. All the social organizations and ministry organizations in the church seem to be declining in attendance and activities, and they really struggle with that. And I think they want to find some place to kind of place the blame. Maybe identify some way to fix this situation. And I think the challenge for us in these days is just to recognize that things have changed, and that the success stories that we have today are going to be much fewer and far between than they were back in the glory days of the church. And I think the changes have taken place within society. And people's attitudes are different now than they were 50 years ago. So I think we face this challenge in reaching those people who have different needs, whose lives are so busy and so involved with so many other things, and yet speaking to the folks who do remember the good old days.
And that sort of ties into my next one. How you see the role having changed in 10 years for civic ministers, and you would say the approach would be different now.
Yeah, I think we have to be aware of what our people are doing, what they're involved in, what their priorities are. But the tools that we have to work with, the job description of Christian ministry is the same that it's always been. I think we have to come up with the best ways of applying these tools that we've been given to particular situations and in particular people's particular needs, but it's the same job that it's always been. And I think that's one of the things that I love about it, is that I can identify with my Christian ancestors that have gone before me, and I can identify with Paul and Peter. And
so you would say this continuity is strength.
yes, yeah, absolutely.
Is that putting it
absolutely
fairly?
Yeah. But I guess the results of that ministry may not be as dramatic as they have been at other particular points in history, and maybe that will change for the better in the future. I'm not good at predicting the future, so
not sure any of us are. We try.
Yeah.
So, well, let's talk about Grace Lutheran Church a little bit. 60 years as of last year. And can you tell us a little bit how the congregation came about? How did it,
well, it's a Grace Lutheran in Oberlin is a sister congregation of Grace Lutheran Church in Elyria, a daughter congregation actually. And Grace Lutheran in Elyria is a daughter congregation of a Grace Lutheran Church in the Cleveland area. And then, some time ago, and I'm not sure exactly how long ago it was, Bethany Lutheran Church was started as a mission from its base at Grace Lutheran here in Oberlin. So there's been kind of a family of congregations that have started up.
Sort of support each other, do they?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I understand it, there was a group of people from Grace Elyria who kind of canvassed this area and found some families that were interested in starting a new congregation here. And that would have been back in the 1936 time frame.
Are there any of the original members?
There are still a handful of them.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Alfred Bauman died here
just recently,
and he was a founding member. His wife Blanche is still alive, and there are a few others.
Good. Is Pat Kaiser
Pat is a member of our congregation.
Is she original? Or very close to it, I'll bet.
I'm not sure exactly how far back she goes.
Well, let's see. You have now a new church building, basically. And you have a new pipe organ. And I wrote down here is the message in 1997, the same as in 1936, basically. And I guess you'd say yes.
It is. It's exactly the same message. Yeah, applied in different circumstances, but yes, the same message.
Now, let me ask a question that I think people might be interested in. The so-called Lutheran Church, of course named after Martin Luther, which I think nobody questions, has within it apparently variations. And as I gather, there's a National Lutheran Council, and then there's the Lutheran Synodical, help me with the pronunciation,
Synodical
I said it right, or conference. And the 4 synods under that, is that correct?
I had to look that information up when you shared with me some of the questions you'd be answering. You are correct.
And the Missouri Synod was one.
Missouri was one of those of the 1872 conference. To be honest with you, I know very little about the history of our church. I remember I had to take a course in the history of the Missouri Synod at the seminary, and I passed the course, and it didn't inspire any any more interest than I had already had in the background. So I haven't been too interested in the recent history of the church, and maybe that's because I see us always kind of hearkening back to the first century church and trying to conform ourselves to the ideals of the beginnings. So I guess that's kind of a personal flaw on my part. I know there are some Lutheran pastors in this area that are very knowledgeable about the history of American Lutheranism, and I'm just not. I didn't grow up in the Lutheran Church, and so I've never had much interest in that.
It sort of reminds me of this whole business of sometimes being vague on what one received in a particular college class. Reminds me of the definition of notes, which you may have heard.
Which is?
Notes are the contents of the professor's notebook entering the notebook of the student without passing through the heads of either one. Perhaps in this case,
Yeah,
I didn't mean to put you on the spot on that, but that flashed into my mind, and I think all of us who've been to college would be guilty of that in some instances. Can you give us a definition of Missouri Synod? What
Well,
does
I
it mean
think
actually?
I think if I were going to try to do that, I would say that the Missouri Synod tries to conform itself to a kind of a definition that was arrived at in the Lutheran Confessions back in the 1580s and earlier. And that is that the Christian Church, and the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod tries to conform to that definition of the Christian Church, is the place where the gospel is rightly preached and the sacraments are instituted according to the way that Christ instituted them. And I think those are the tools that we have to work with, and that's what we try to do. And I think the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod really makes an effort to conform to that.
Let me ask this. Are all Lutheran churches, regardless of whether they're synod or not, liturgically oriented?
I think generally so, but there's nothing carved in stone about that. In fact, I believe that the confessions indicate that there is some freedom allowed in style and form of worship, that all congregations of the Christian church don't necessarily need to be worshiping in the same fashion at the same time from week to week.
I have a college friend who's been very active in Trinity Lutheran Church in Akron.
Okay.
And he ties it, what he said ties into something you said. He bemoans the older days when the language wasn't changed and people came more and so forth and so forth. But I believe that parish, I'm just using that as an example, is not Missouri Synod.
Okay.
So my question is, would he be comfortable at your church, or would one of your members be comfortable in his?
Oh, I think pretty
They
much
wouldn't feel
so.
strange,
I
or-
think Lutherans feel pretty comfortable traveling around and going to different Lutheran churches. There is, as you may be aware, there's kind of a controversy going on, not only in Lutheran churches but other churches as well, about what's appropriate as a style and form of worship. Some churches, I think, are making an effort to be more up to date, more contemporary in their style and form of worship. Other churches are more content with a more traditional, formal style of worship. I think the congregation here, the Grace Lutheran Church here in Oberlin, is pretty traditional in our forms of worship. I hope not rigidly so, but we think that's a good way to worship, and I think most of our members are fairly comfortable with that.
Now, would the synods, for example, churches be perhaps more conservative than the, what was the other one I had, the National Lutheran Church?
Yeah, the
would there not
Lutheran
be?
Church Missouri Synod is known as a conservative church. There are Lutheran branches of Lutheranism that are more conservative than we are and less conservative than we are. The liberal and conservative labels are sometimes kind of hard to pin down.
Yeah, I know that.
And a little bit
a little
misleading.
dangerous to use, I think, sometimes.
I think all of the Lutheran
because they're-
churches, you'd be pretty safe in saying that they believe that the Bible is the sole source of faith and practice among Lutherans, and that the interpretation that we use to interpret the Bible is what's recorded in the Lutheran Confessions. And I think you'd basically get all Lutherans to agree that that's the way things are in all the Lutheran denominations.
Let me ask a generic question. What do you see the role of the church in Oberlin being by the year 2000? 3 years away. Is there something you think it should be, or what do you see it being? And I mean now the church universal in Oberlin, not just Grace Lutheran or First Church or Methodist or...
Right. I've heard a lot of talk about what are the implications of the approach of the new millennium, and I don't know what the implications are. I've heard a lot of suggestions that seem to make sense and may turn out to be, but I guess I'd go back to my earlier answer and say the role, the mission of the church in the new millennium will be the same as it has always been. To preach the gospel of salvation in Jesus Christ, to teach people about the Bible, to administer the sacraments that Christ has instituted. bottom line, that's what we'll always be about, and always have been about.
Do you see more need for, or do you expect there will be more general involvement in social issues as we get into the next century, or
that may
you
be.
think that's coming? And
that
if
may
so,
very
how do
well
the
be.
two relate?
I think there's a focus within society on those kinds of issues, and I think if the church is wise, it will make use of those opportunities in its ministry of God's Word and the sacraments. But it's always going to come back to the Word and the sacraments. The church needs to be about that kind of ministry, and you know, we shouldn't get distracted from our primary function.
And that ties into this question, I think. Would you care to state what? Let me read through this. Will the role of the church in the United States, do you think, be vastly different, say, in the year 2050 than it is now?
I would say if trends continue and if changes take place at the rapid and accelerating rate that they have in recent years, I'd say that society will be changing a lot. And I would guess that those changes that will take place in society will increase the need for that solid foundation of Christian ministry. So I hope that, you know, the church doesn't, as I say, get distracted from its primary mission. But I think the faster society changes, and the more it will need what the Christian church has to offer.
You said a little earlier that there seemed to be a feeling that there were old-timers in the church, older, but the youth weren't coming in and so forth, and as they might. And I think that's true of many churches, not only here, but everywhere.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts about how churches can go about getting youth more involved?
If I did, I'd be a wealthy man.
You'd be very wealthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you'd give half of it to the church. If you were.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, we're just...
No, I really don't, and those are important questions, and I don't have any insight. I guess I would say in 10 years of ministry, I've come to realize that I'm not nearly as intelligent as I was when I started. I thought I had so many answers when I started ministry, and I've come to realize that I don't. Those answers didn't work and don't work very well. But you know, I think those of us who come to this point, this kind of humbling point in ministry, it's very nice to have the Lord to lean on, and ultimately it's His work that He allows us to be involved in, and to participate and to see Him work, and you know, that's what gives me hope, and that's what gives me my enthusiasm for ministry, is that He's the one doing the work, and I really don't have any answers. People don't want my answers; they want His answers.
I guess for what it's worth, I think that you say you sometimes don't know the answers, and some of us, as we get older, don't even know what the questions are. So don't feel don't feel too badly. Well, we're just about winding this down. Have you got any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I guess the one thing I would like to do is invite all of the viewers to join us for worship on Sunday mornings. We have an early service at 8:30 in the morning. Then we have a Bible study and Sunday school hour that starts at 9:45, and our late worship service is at 11. And I remember the first time I came here and worshipped as a visitor in the congregation. I felt very, very welcome. Even before people knew who I was.
I was going to ask you if they knew who you were, or whether you just slipped in.
Afterwards, they did. But I think people will feel comfortable if they come and spend some time with us, and we'd love to have them. You have a new, larger sanctuary just waiting for a nice organ, for nice warm bodies to be there. About that. That's wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. Well, I do thank you for being with us, and I want to present you with a Conversations with Lothrop mug. Well, thank you so much. It has two chairs there, empty, but not only actually, not in spirit. And we thank you so very, very much. I've enjoyed it. For being with us tonight. I've enjoyed it. We will have another guest to interview on the end of May, and hope you can join us then. In the meantime, this is Dick Lothrop saying thank you very much for being with us tonight,
and we will see you in a month.